So we pick up in the second half of Act Three with McCann and Goldberg. I think on the cusp of a moment of crisis that never actually emerges, and that's the sort of importance of this section of the play. You know, they re-establish their sense of commitment to sort of false ideologies and false sense of belonging to discourses. I think that only highlight their absence at the centre of their essential sense of self. So there's a pause, and Goldberg leans back in the chair with his eyes closed. So then there's this sort of emphasis in this moment, I think, on the potential need for some form of imagination. I think to deal with their developing sense of guilt and perhaps their own sense of purposelessness that's plaguing them at this moment in time. So Goldberg feels a sense of fatigue here, which he actively sort of explains here is unusual for him. So it says McCann is kind of keen to keep himself distracted at this moment in time, whereas Goldberg is kind of reflective. But they're both fearful and uncomfortable at this moment in time because I think the experience itself has taken its toll on them. There's an exposure of their fears, and their fears are not abstractions, and it's important in that this is their method of recovery from a kind of ennui, a sense of fatigue and I think bordering on melancholy at this moment in time. So they talk to very little purpose about going to get Stanley. McCann says, I want to get it over, and Goldberg says that's understandable. And there's this sort of moment of vulnerability and empathy between the two of them. And they keep trying to establish whether they need to go and get him or not. And I think their uncertainty is evident here because there's no rationale that they can provide for doing so. So he interrupts and says, I don't know why, but I feel knocked out. I feel it's uncommon for me. And the pause there is important because it shows that he can't acknowledge his conscience or, I think, his sense of weakness that he's feeling in response to this developing sense of guilt. And McCann also is unable to sort of articulate anything helpful in response. He just says, is that so it's unusual. So McCann, rising swiftly, goes behind Goldberg's chair, hissing. And I think it's very deliberate, this. That there's some form of crude sense of difference and pangs of conscience, I think, in this moment in time. But also McCann's sort of evil intent. He says, let's finish and go, let's get it over and go. Get the thing done, let's finish the bloody thing, let's get the thing done and go. Pause. This is evasive language again. You know, it's just this repetitive, almost compulsion that they need, that McCann needs to be engaged in the action of the thing itself, rather than to actually think about the purpose of it. McCann's central mechanism for coping with conscience is to just evade it through some form of activity and distraction, and that's what the pause, I think, signifies. Is a difficulty confronting the truth that's motivating his desire for action. He asks again, he needs direction, he needs to be told in the same way that he does in the beginning. He needs to be instructed how to do this. And he says, will I go up? And Stanley simply said, Goldberg doesn't respond. And the pause again shows us that he can't lead or act without a sense of direction. And then he calls him Nat, and this doesn't provoke a response. And then Goldberg sits humped. So he's in this state, I think, of it's nearly despair. It doesn't quite ever materialize into this, but it nearly verges on this. And then I think McCann realizes that he needs to provoke Goldberg and knows that Sime is going to provoke a response, so he uses this different name. And I think it provokes a response because it's a signal of his lies and inauthenticity, and that's also important. What did you call me? So there's this type of speech here that very, very quickly, the provocation in his name, I think, it's a name that he gives himself, but is a reminder of his authenticity, his inauthenticity and guilt. And you see the effect of this sudden transition. He becomes murderous. And I think this also mimics McCann's sudden transition into a kind of murderous intent earlier on in the play. And the capital letters never call me that, and McCann is writhing. He's squirming in discomfort. So we see this huge sense of sudden aggressive power from Goldberg that hasn't really been there in the play. You know, he largely relies on McCann to do the vicious things in the text. And he's writhing here in a sense of weakness. And he just keeps asking him questions. I called you Nat. Honest to God, just a question, that's all. Just a question, do you see? Do you follow me? He jerks him away. What question? And I think here, he reveals his power over his own thought and dislocation here, because he hasn't actually asked the question, because it shows you that the question is not what's bothered him. It's not the question of will I go up. It's the fact that he has used this name that I think provokes some form of awareness of his own lies and his own inauthenticity. Goldberg violently says, "Up! I thought you weren't going to go up there again." So he exposes McCann's earlier pledge, and that he was actually listening at that moment, in spite of appearing not to. So McCann's promise here is not earnest, and so there's a very dramatic change in a short time. McCann says, "What do you mean? Why not? You said so. I never said that. No." So here, there's this actual inaccurate moment of communication between them, and so this moment where Goldberg is actually holding him to sort of verbal account here, trying to get him to explain accurately his previous references, creates a moment of sort of communicative breakdown. They're lacking in communicative integrity, and I think there's cracks appearing both in their own rationales and their own sense of purpose, but also in the way that they interact with each other. From the floor to the room at large, McCann says, "Who said that? I never said that. I'll go up now." So there's a loss of control over his own experience, I think, that's highlighted in this line. And the fact that he's speaking to the room at large almost suggests that it's not exclusively directed at Goldberg. I mean, actually, there's this larger sense of guilt that's plaguing him. He jumps up and rushes to the door left. And so there's a sort of willingness to change here and adapt, I think, that's going on in this particular line in the text. Sorry, the willingness to change with his sense of developing guilt as he jumps up and rushes to the door left. But then Goldberg shouts, "Wait!" And there's this desperate need, I think, to re-establish a sense of purpose and integrity. Goldberg cannot, like McCann, just commit to an action and use the activity of the action to distract him from his own conscience. He needs to convince himself that he's acting according to some sort of moral rationale, and that's what he ends up trying to formulate with language in the following section. First of all, though, he resorts to his body. He stretches his arms to the arms of the chair, and he orders McCann to come here, who approaches slowly, and then he asks him, I think, to look in his mouth. So there's this suggestion here, I think, that the body is the last sort of site of self-integrity, that this is perhaps the only location where an authentic sense of self might be identified, prior to relying on this sort of linguistic strategies that he's used previously in the text. Then McCann looks in and Goldberg asks him, "Do you know what I mean?" and expects him to grasp the significance of this particular action, which of course is a sort of impossibility because they aren't able to articulate the significance of this, and it relies upon their failure to articulate its significance for it to work, I think. He says, "You know what, I've never lost a tooth, not since the day I was born, nothing's changed." So I think this sense of stability that he's talking about and the physical strength that it implies gives us this false sense of personal integrity that he's trying to re-establish on the back of losing his sense of a rationale for this action this aggressive action that he's committed, and nothing's changed. So this stasis is mistaken for a sense of legitimacy in his lines here. That's why I've reached my position, McCann, because I've always been as fit as a fiddle. And so there's a sort of illogical quality to this explanation of his success at this moment in time. It's an illogical attempt, I think, to affirm his purpose at this moment in the play and to affirm the integrity of his identity. All my life I've said the same: play up, and play the game. This is again this sequence of inauthentic cliches that belong to institutions and function really as nothing more than a series of illusions. So play up and play the game, obviously, is this line from World War One, kind of patriotic recruitment drive song, and then he says, "Follow the line, McCann, and you can't go wrong." Again, that actually the phrase itself communicates a false sense of security, that the language that's being used, that you follow the line and you can't go wrong. You take your orders, and there's no way that you can fail. Honor thy father and thy mother, all along the line. So we've got this invocation of the family, this invocation of the virtue of obedience, but without actually any processing, no rationale, no explanation of its value to them. He says, "What do you think? I'm a self-made man." No, I sat where I was told to sit. And so again, this sense of adherence to authority is part of what he manages to reassure himself about. So really, when you look at the language that he uses here, it's nothing more than a set of various different discourses that value adherence to authority and power hierarchies. He says, "Don't talk to me about school. Top in all subjects, and for why? Because I'm telling you, follow my line, follow my mental, learn by heart, never write down a thing." And so he doesn't actually tell you why. He just exposes that he has absorbed these sort of these directives without planning, and actually can't tell you why, other than just to follow the orders. So there's no, he says, "and for why." He doesn't actually tell us why. He just says because he's telling us. He just repeats, I'm telling you, I'm telling you. He doesn't actually say why, and then asks that you follow his mental thoughts, and then just descends into these series of directives. So he just needs ordering around rather than being given a reason. And then again, he's lost without direction, so don't go too near the water. And then he says, "And you'll find that what I say is true." And so there's a self-fulfilling truth about his lines here, that if you follow the warnings, I think, of these lines, you'll feel somehow in a further position to receive more of them. You know, that you will, if you adhere to these moments of stricture and these moments of authority, you will be in the position like McCann, where that is the only way that you can operate and the only way that you can make sense of the world. And these lines here are really crucial. Because I believe that the world, because I believe that the world, because I believe that the world. And the intensity of this inarticulacy expresses his vacant sense of purpose and his ability to only make sense of himself through this power-based relativism. That he is incapable of articulating a sense of purpose. He cannot come up with an affirmation of his own purpose in life and the value of existence itself, and then sits in a chair. And this is again important. He adopts this image of subordination in the play, that sitting becomes so crucial. He says, "Sit down, McCann, sit where I can look at you." So he responds to his own absence of purpose with hierarchy and relativism itself. So he knows that he can't do anything, and therefore immediately resorts to this desire to gain some form of relational superiority over McCann himself. McCann kneels in front of the table, and I think this is deliberately sort of theological and religious in its suggestiveness here, that they are adhering to this this religiously stylized stagecraft that creates this sense of authority. And so he then moves into this second attempt, I think, to justify his behavior through a kind of patrilineal connection here. He said, "My father said to me, 'Benny, Benny,' he said, 'come here.'" So again, there's a loss of self. This is a second name. He's got another name. He was dying. And so there's a sort of irony here, because it's himself and his own identity that we see the absence of here through this anecdote about someone else's death. "I knelt down by him day and night. Who else was there? Forgive, Benny," he said, "and let live." So again, we think what he's invoking in this story is this sort of reaffirmation of a sense of commitment by him day and night. Who else was there? But it deliberately runs against many of the other stories that he has used so far in the play by invoking this tight knit sense of family. So again, there's a sense of instability about this story as well. He said, "Forgive Benny," he said, "and let live. Yes, Dad. Go home to your wife. I will, Dad." And so there's a sort of misguided sense of empathy, I think, in these lines that follow this. But before so, this sense of familiarity with his father. Yes, Dad. Go home to your wife. I will, Dad. Again, exposes his own sense of comfort with simply being ordered around. He says, "Keep an eye out for lowlifes, for snorers, and for layabouts." He didn't mention names. "I lost my life in the service of others," he said. "I'm not ashamed." So there's this sort of misguided sense of empathy and commitment, but there is a moment of authenticity within here, and that actually, I think, probably sheds some light on the reason why he has such a strong sense of hostility towards Stanley. "Do your duty and keep your observations. Always bid good morning to the neighbours. Never forget your family, for they are the rock, the constitution, and the core. If you're ever in any difficulties, Uncle Barney will see you in the clear." So at that moment in time, he's reassured by this series of imperatives, that his father is using in order to give him a sense of comfort and familiarity, and that's where he is most happy. "I knelt down." He kneels facing McCann, and so here he is the one gaining a subordinate position. "I swore on the good book." He's talking about the Torah here, I presume, if we're seeing him as a Jewish individual. "And I knew the word I had to remember, respect." So it's not necessarily here, a sense of purpose. It's purely about hierarchy again. Respect. Because McCann, and he says this gently, Seamus, again, he's changed names. Who came before your father, his father, and who came before him? Before him. Vacant and triumphant. And I think that captured that the sort of the tension in that stage direction captures everything that we need to know about Goldberg, is that he has managed to drain himself of a rationale and significance, and that has given him a sense of triumphalism. Who came before your father's father, but your father's father's mother, your great-grand-granny. And so this invocation of patrilineal connection is ironic because there's this moment of instability in it, and tracing your family ancestry is another one of these methods that we conventionally use in order to give ourselves some sort of affirmative sense of authenticity. But at this moment in time, it's littered with these deliberately unstable references to McCann's identity, that he was once Dermot and now he's Seamus. So we've got this tension between the unreliability of his name and the idea of authenticity and stability that invoking your kind of heritage and your patrilineal family history is supposed to create. He slowly rises and then comes to this position where he has managed to reconvince himself ultimately. And that's why I've reached my position, McCann, because I've always been as fit as a fiddle. My motto, work hard and play hard, not a day's illness. So this is a kind of false answer that he doesn't provide an explanation of why he's reached his position. He just simply invokes a nostalgic story about respecting hierarchy. And then he goes at the end onto this sense of physicality. So the physicality is a kind of prompt for the realization of all the orthodoxies and relativisms that I think allow him to feel a sense of comfort. The physicality is that last sight of authenticity of the self that then re-prompts his attempt to re-establish his connection to all of these modes of discourse and various forms of belonging that I think are designed in order to shroud and mask this sense of inauthenticity.